My name is Nora, and I am 32 years old. I work as an elementary school teacher in a small town just outside of Chicago. All my life, I tried so hard to please my mother to make her proud to feel her love. But nothing ever seemed good enough. Then came that day when she looked me straight in the eyes and said those words I will never forget. You were the biggest mistake of my life. My heart shattered into a million pieces, but instead of crying, I did something unexpected. I smiled. What happened next changed both our lives forever. If you are watching this video, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. This story might help someone who needs to hear it today. I grew up in a quaint little town in Iowa where everyone knew everyone else. Our house was small but neat with faded blue paint and white shutters that my mother Amanda insisted on repainting every spring. She was beautiful with golden blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that could freeze you in place when she was angry. Before I was born, Amanda had been the town beauty queen crowned Miss Cedar Rapids, 1989. She had dreams of modeling in New York or acting in Hollywood dreams that were put on indefinite hold when she got pregnant with me at 22. My father Thomas was handsome and charming according to the few photographs I have of him. He left when I was just 4 years old. I have only fragments of memories of him, the smell of his cologne, the sound of his laugh, the way he would toss me up in the air and catch me. One day he simply did not come home. My mother told me he had found someone new, someone without the baggage of a wife and child. After my father left, something changed in my mother. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a hardness that scared me as a child. She became bitter, constantly reminding me how different her life would have been if she had never had me. "I could have been somebody," she would say while staring at her reflection in the mirror, pinching the slight wrinkles forming at the corners of her eyes. I learned early on that the only way to get any positive attention from my mother was to be perfect. I studied hard, getting straight A's from first grade onward. I kept my room immaculate, helped with chores without being asked, and never complained when dinner was late or non-existent because she had forgotten. I became the perfect daughter, hoping that one day it would be enough to make her love me. But no matter what I achieved, it was never enough for Amanda. When I brought home perfect report cards, she would scan them quickly and say, "This is what is expected, Nora. Do not act like you deserve special praise for doing what you are supposed to do." When I won the school's spelling bee in 5th grade, beating students 2 grades above me, she only commented that my posture on stage was terrible and that I should have worn a different outfit. The only moments of warmth in my childhood came from my Aunt Jasmine, my mother's younger sister, who lived a few towns over. She would visit every few months, bringing small gifts and genuine hugs. "You are such a special girl, Nora," she would whisper to me. "Do not ever forget that." Those words were like water in a desert, and I clung to them during the dry spells between her visits. Despite the emotional neglect at home, I developed a resilience that would serve me well later in life. I learned to find joy in my own achievements, to congratulate myself when no one else would. I found solace in books, losing myself in stories about girls with loving families, imagining what that must feel like. I became determined that one day I would create that kind of loving environment for myself, even if I had no idea yet how to do it. My teenage years brought new challenges as I navigated high school while watching my relationship with my mother grow increasingly distant. I threw myself into academics and extracurricular activities, partly to build my college applications and partly to avoid being at home. I joined the debate team, the school newspaper, and volunteered at the local library, filling my schedule so completely that I often left the house before my mother woke up and returned after she had gone to bed. Amanda had started dating again when I was around 13, bringing home a series of boyfriends who never seemed to last more than a few months. Some were nice enough, awkwardly trying to make conversation with me over dinner. Others barely acknowledged my existence. I became accustomed to coming home to find strange jackets hanging in our hallway, unfamiliar shoes by the door. I learned to move silently through the house to make myself invisible, a skill that came from years of practice trying not to trigger my mother's unpredictable moods. On my 16th birthday, I woke up with a small flutter of hope in my chest. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today my mother would make an effort. I came downstairs to find the kitchen empty, a note on the counter. Working late. Leftovers in fridge. She had forgotten completely. I sat at the kitchen table alone, a single cupcake I had bought for myself the day before sitting in front of me. I lit a candle, sang happy birthday in a whisper, and made a wish that someday someone would think I was worth remembering. That same year I became close friends with Sophia Martinez, whose family lived a few blocks away. The first time I visited their home for dinner, I was overwhelmed by the warmth and noise and laughter. Her parents asked me questions about school and actually listened to my answers. Her father teased her affectionately, and her mother kissed the top of her head when she passed behind her chair. I remember sitting there, fork frozen halfway to my mouth, watching this foreign dance of family love play out before me. This was how it could be. This was what I had been missing. "Your mom is really pretty," Sophia said to me once after meeting Amanda briefly when she picked me up from their house. "But she seems sad." "She is," I replied, surprising myself with my honesty. "She has been sad for as long as I can remember." As I approached my senior year, the emotional distance between my mother and me had grown into a chasm. One night I overheard her on the phone with a friend complaining about how hard it was to be a single mother, how much she had sacrificed. "Do you know where I would be without her?" she said, not bothering to lower her voice, though I was just in the next room. "Anywhere but stuck in this town. She ruined everything." I sat perfectly still on the couch, a textbook open on my lap, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. I had always known deep down that my mother resented me, but hearing it stated so plainly still had the power to cut me to the core. Despite this, I continued to excel academically and was accepted to several colleges, ultimately choosing Northwestern University on a partial scholarship. The day my acceptance letter arrived, I showed it to my mother, still harboring that small, stubborn hope for her approval. "Chicago." "That is expensive," she said, handing the letter back to me. "I hope you do not expect me to help pay for it." "I got a scholarship," I told her, "and I will get a job. You will not have to pay anything." She nodded, then changed the subject. It was as close to approval as I was going to get. My high school graduation should have been a moment of triumph, but like so many other milestones in my life, it was overshadowed by my mother's behavior. She arrived late to the ceremony, missing my speech as class valedictorian. At the small celebration afterward at Sophia's house, she spent the entire time talking about herself, telling anyone who would listen about how she had sacrificed her own dreams to raise me alone. I watched her from across the room, this beautiful, bitter woman who had given me life but withheld the love I craved, and I made a promise to myself. College would be my fresh start. I would build a life so full and rich that the hole she had left in my heart would eventually close. Leaving for Northwestern that August was the first time I felt like I could truly breathe. My dorm room was tiny, shared with a girl named Rachel from Michigan, who talked too much and stayed up too late, but it was mine. It was away from the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home, away from the constant feeling that I was a burden, a mistake, a living reminder of all my mother's lost opportunities. I called Amanda once a week, out of obligation, brief conversations that followed the same script each time. Yes, classes were fine. Yes, I was eating enough. No, I did not need anything. We never discussed how I was really feeling, the exhilaration of learning from professors who were passionate about their subjects, the friendships I was forming, the gradual unfolding of a Nora who existed separate from her mother's disapproval. I discovered my passion for teaching during my sophomore year when I volunteered at an after-school program in one of Chicago's underserved neighborhoods. Something about working with children, especially those who, like me, did not always get the emotional support they needed at home, felt right. I changed my major from business to education, ignoring my mother's comments about choosing a career that would keep me broke forever. "Teachers are so undervalued," she said during one of our phone calls. "You are smart enough to do something that actually pays well." "I want to make a difference," I told her. "Not every decision is about money." "You will change your mind when you are struggling to pay rent," she replied. But I did not change my mind. For the first time in my life, I was following my own path, making choices based on what felt right to me, rather than what might finally earn my mother's approval. It was terrifying and liberating all at once. During my junior year, I met James in a literature class we both took as an elective. He was studying engineering, tall, with dark curly hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Our relationship developed slowly, starting with coffee after class, then study sessions, then finally a real date where he took me to a tiny Italian restaurant and told me I was beautiful with such sincerity that I actually believed him. James was different from anyone I had ever known. He listened when I talked, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and remembering the details. He respected my opinions and encouraged my dreams of teaching. And most shocking of all, he seemed to genuinely enjoy being with me for no other reason than because I was me. When I finally gathered the courage to tell him about my relationship with my mother, we were sitting on a blanket in the park, watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. I stumbled through the explanation, trying to make it sound less pathetic than it felt. "So basically, my mom has always made it pretty clear that having me ruined her life," I concluded, staring at my hands. "I have spent my whole life trying to make it up to her somehow." James was quiet for a long moment, then took my hand in his. "Nora," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you do not owe your mother for being born. That was her choice, not yours. And for what it is worth, I think the world is much better with you in it." I blinked back, tears overwhelmed by the simple kindness of his words. It was a perspective I had never considered before, that I was not somehow inherently at fault for the trajectory my mother's life had taken. When I brought James home for a weekend during senior year, Amanda was predictably unimpressed. She flirted with him in a way that made us both uncomfortable. Then later, when he was out of earshot, told me I should hold on to this one, because he was probably the best you will get. I cut the visit short, making up an excuse about needing to get back for a study group. On the drive back to school, James reached across the console and took my hand. "I get it now," he said simply. "What you have been dealing with all these years. I am sorry." My college graduation was another milestone marred by my mother's behavior. She showed up late, complained about the heat during the ceremony, and left early, claiming she had a headache. She did not stay for the small celebration my friends had organized, did not meet my favorite professors, did not take the time to understand the woman I had become during those 4 transformative years. After graduation, I accepted a teaching position at an elementary school in Madison, Wisconsin, not too far from Chicago, but far enough from my hometown in Iowa. I found a small apartment with big windows and filled it with plants and books and colorful throw pillows. I spent my days teaching third graders, finding immense satisfaction in helping them discover their own potential. I spent my evenings grading papers, planning lessons, and slowly building a circle of friends who accepted me as I was. My relationship with James continued long distance for a while, with him working in Chicago and me in Madison. We visited each other on weekends, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He was the first person who made me feel truly seen and valued, and that gift was immeasurable. Though we eventually drifted apart as our careers took us in different directions, the impact he had on my healing journey remained. For the first time in my life, I was creating a life that felt authentically mine. I was no longer living in the shadow of my mother's resentment, no longer desperately seeking approval I was never going to receive. I was building my own definition of success, my own sources of joy, my own chosen family of friends who genuinely cared about me. The wound my mother had inflicted was still there, a tender spot that ached when pressed, but it no longer defined me. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October, just as I was finishing grading a stack of spelling tests. My Aunt Jasmine's name flashed on my phone screen, unusual since we typically talked on weekends. "Nora," she said, her voice tight with worry, "your mom is in the hospital. She collapsed at work. The doctors think it might be her heart." I sat down hard on my couch, a rush of complicated emotions washing over me. Is she going to be okay?" "They think so, but she is asking for you. I know things have been difficult between you two, but I will be there, I said, already mentally calculating the drive time from Madison to Cedar Rapids. I will leave first thing in the morning. I arrived at the hospital the following afternoon, navigating the sterile hallways until I found my mother's room. She looked small in the hospital bed. Her once vibrant blonde hair now dyed a darker shade and streaked with gray. She was asleep when I entered, and I stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of my place in this room in her life. Aunt Jasmine spotted me from her chair by the window and came over, embracing me tightly. "It was just exhaustion and dehydration," she whispered. "She is going to be fine. The doctor wants to keep her one more night for observation, then she can go home. Thank you for coming." My mother stirred, then her eyes fluttering open. She looked at me without surprise, as if she had expected me to materialize at her bedside despite our strained relationship. "Nora," she said, her voice raspy, "you did not have to drive all this way." It was so typically her, not a hint of warmth or gratitude in her voice. Just a statement that somehow managed to make me feel both obligated and unwelcome. "Of course I came," I replied, moving closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I collapsed at work and embarrassed myself in front of everyone," she said wryly. "They are making a big deal out of nothing. I just forgot to eat lunch." The doctor told a different story when he came by on rounds. My mother had been working too hard, sleeping too little, neglecting her health. She needed rest, proper nutrition, and someone to keep an eye on her for a few days after discharge. "I can stay for a week," I offered after the doctor left, surprising myself as much as my mother. "I have some personal days saved up. I can help out until you are back on your feet." A week turned into 2 as it became clear that my mother needed more help than she was willing to admit. I slept in my old bedroom, now converted into a home office, on an uncomfortable pull-out sofa. I cooked healthy meals that my mother picked at, drove her to follow-up appointments, and tried to maintain some semblance of peace between us. It was during this extended stay that I discovered the box in the attic. I had gone up there looking for some winter clothes my mother claimed were stored in a bin, and instead found a cardboard box labeled simply "Before." Inside were photographs I had never seen my mother as a teenager in a dance recital, her body graceful and strong as she executed a perfect arabesque. There were competition ribbons, programs from performances, and a worn envelope containing an acceptance letter to a dance school in New York, dated just months before I was born. Beneath these artifacts of my mother's former life, I found a stack of letters tied with a faded ribbon. They were from my father, his handwriting elegant and slanted. I should not have read them, but once I started, I could not stop. The early letters were full of love and plans for the future. "My darling Amanda," one began, "I cannot wait to start our life together with our baby. You will be the most beautiful mother, and I will be the most devoted father." But the later letters took on a different tone, full of accusations and recriminations. "You will not let me forget for 1 minute that you gave up dancing for this baby," the final letter read. "But you forget that I gave up things too. The difference is, I do not hold it against our child." I sat in the dusty attic for over an hour, piecing together a more complete picture of my parents' relationship, of my mother's dreams that had died with my birth. I had always known in a vague way that she resented me for derailing her life plans. But seeing the tangible evidence of what she had given up, the specific dream that had been lost, somehow made it both more understandable and more painful. When I came downstairs, I looked at my mother with new eyes. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone, a half-empty cup of tea in front of her. She had been a dancer, once a girl with passion and promise. Somewhere along the way, that girl had disappeared, replaced by this bitter woman who could not see past her own disappointment to love the daughter right in front of her. The tension between us grew as the days passed. Small irritations accumulated like snowflakes, building toward an inevitable avalanche. She criticized the way I loaded the dishwasher, complained that the chicken I cooked was too dry, made cutting remarks about my simple wardrobe and lack of makeup. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was recovering, that I would be going back to my own life soon. But on my final night there, as I prepared dinner in the kitchen, the avalanche finally came. I had made a simple pasta dish, one of the few meals my mother usually ate without complaint. She came into the kitchen as I was chopping vegetables for a salad. "I thought we would have something different tonight," she said, eyeing the pasta sauce simmering on the stove with distaste. "We have had pasta twice already this week." "I could make something else," I offered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "But this is almost ready, and I thought you liked this recipe." "It is fine." She sighed the way she always did when something was decidedly not fine. "I suppose it is too much to ask for a little variety." I continued chopping, the knife hitting the cutting board with more force than necessary. "If you had told me earlier that you wanted something different, I could have planned for it. I should not have to spell everything out for you, Nora. A thoughtful person would just know." I put the knife down carefully. "Mom, I have been here for 2 weeks cooking every meal, driving you to appointments, doing your laundry. I have tried to anticipate your needs, but I cannot read your mind." "Oh, so now you want gratitude for doing the bare minimum a daughter should do for her mother." Her voice took on the familiar sharp edge that had cut me so many times before. "After all I have done for you, raising you by myself after your father abandoned us, giving up everything—" "Yes, I know. You gave up everything for me." The words escaped before I could stop them, years of pent-up hurt pushing them out. "Your dance career, New York, the life you could have had. I have heard it my entire life. But here is the thing, Mom. I never asked to be born. That was your choice." Her eyes widened, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, maybe even remorse. But then her face hardened again. "My choice. You think I chose this small life in this nothing town. You were an accident, Nora. A mistake that cost me everything I ever wanted." I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Though she had implied it countless times throughout my life, she had never stated it so baldly, so cruelly. I stood frozen, the words echoing in my head, each repetition a fresh wound. And then she delivered the final blow, her voice low and venomous. "You were the biggest mistake of my life." In that moment I felt something break inside me, a dam that had been holding back years of pain and rejection. The words hit me with physical force, making my chest ache as if my heart was literally breaking apart. I could not breathe, could not speak, could not move as the truth I had always sensed but never fully acknowledged was finally laid bare between us. "You were the biggest mistake of my life." 6 simple words that confirmed my deepest fear, the one that had haunted me since childhood. My own mother wished I had never existed. The ultimate rejection, the most fundamental wound a parent could inflict on a child. But as I stood there in the kitchen, something unexpected happened. Rather than collapsing into tears or storming out in anger, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was as if hearing the words out loud in their most brutal form finally freed me from their power. The fear of not being wanted, of being a burden, of being unloved by the one person who should love you unconditionally had shaped my entire life. And now that fear had materialized in its most concrete form, and somehow I was still standing. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, seeing not the towering figure of my childhood, but a middle-aged woman with fading beauty and a heart so constricted by bitterness that it had almost stopped beating altogether. For the first time I saw her clearly, not as the mother I had always wanted her to be, but as the flawed, damaged person she actually was. And then, to her visible confusion, I smiled. It was not a happy smile, not exactly, but the smile of someone who has finally seen through an illusion that has been tormenting them for years. The smile of recognition, of clarity, of unexpected liberation. "What are you smiling at?" she demanded, thrown off balance by my reaction. She had expected tears or anger or pleading denial. My calm smile was not in the script she had been following all these years. "I am smiling because I finally understand." I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I have spent my entire life trying to earn your love, trying to be good enough, perfect enough, accomplished enough to make you glad I was born. But now I see that was never going to happen. It is not about me, Mom. It never was." She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the familiar anger in her eyes now mixed with confusion and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "You cannot love me because you cannot forgive yourself." I continued, the words flowing now, truth after truth that I had never dared speak aloud. "For getting pregnant, for not going to New York, for Dad leaving. You blame me for all of it because it is easier than admitting you made your own choices. But I am not your mistake, Mom. I am a person. A whole separate person who deserved to be loved, not punished for existing. You do not understand anything," she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "You have no idea what I gave up for you." "I do know," I said quietly. "I found the box in the attic. I saw the acceptance letter to the dance school, the photos, the letters from Dad. I know exactly what you gave up. And I'm sorry that happened to you. I really am. But I was a child, an innocent child who needed her mother's love, not her resentment." My mother took a step back as if my words had physically pushed her. "You had no right to go through my things." "Maybe not," I acknowledged. "But it helped me understand. And now I need you to understand something. I am done trying to make you love me. I am done apologizing for being born. I am done." With a control I did not know I possessed, I turned off the stove, put the knife in the sink, and walked past my mother to the stairs. I could feel her watching me, could feel the shock radiating from her as I calmly ascended to my temporary bedroom and began to pack my things. My hands should have been shaking, but they were steady as I folded clothes and tucked away toiletries. The emotional storm I had expected, the breakdown that should have followed her cruel words, never came. Instead, I felt a profound sense of clarity, as if a fog had lifted, and I could finally see the path before me. I had been seeking approval from someone fundamentally incapable of giving it. No achievement of mine would ever be enough because the problem was not my worth, but her inability to see it. The revelation was both heartbreaking and freeing. I could stop trying now. I could stop exhausting myself running on a hamster wheel of maternal validation that was never going to come. When I came back downstairs with my packed bag, my mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up as I entered, and for a brief moment I thought she might apologize, might take back those terrible words, or at least try to soften them. But she remained silent, watching me with an expression I could not quite read. "I am leaving now," I said, my voice still remarkably calm. "Aunt Jasmine can check in on you tomorrow. You are well enough to manage on your own." So that is it. One difficult conversation and you just walk out proves what I have always said about your generation. You cannot handle anything tough. It was a typical deflection, a desperate attempt to shift blame, to paint me as the villain in our story. But this time, I did not take the bait. This was not one difficult conversation, Mom. This was 32 years of you making me feel unwanted, followed by you finally saying out loud what you have been communicating my entire life. I am not walking out because things got tough. I am walking out because I finally understand that things will never change, and I deserve better. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. Just before leaving, I turned back one last time. I will always be your daughter, and in my own way, I will always love you because of that. But I cannot keep allowing you to hurt me. Goodbye, Mom. And with those words, I walked out the door, got into my car, and drove away from the house that had never truly been a home, from the mother who had never truly been able to mother me. I did not know it then, but what I would do next would change both our lives forever. I drove straight to Aunt Jasmine's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation with my mother was beginning to wear off, leaving me shaky and hollow. By the time I pulled into her driveway, tears were streaming down my face, the first I had allowed myself since hearing those devastating words. Aunt Jasmine opened her door to find me standing there with my bag, face wet with tears, barely able to form coherent sentences. She pulled me inside without question, sat me on her couch, and disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a cup of tea and a box of tissues. "Your mother called," she said simply. "She told me what happened. or her version of it anyway. I wiped my eyes, trying to imagine what spin my mother had put on our confrontation. "Did she tell you what she said to me?" Aunt Jasmine nodded, her face sad. "She did. And I want you to know, Nora, that she is wrong. So terribly wrong." I spent that night on Aunt Jasmine's guest bed, sleeping fitfully, waking often to the echo of my mother's words in my head. By morning, though, a plan had begun to form, a way to respond that felt right, that would allow me to express everything I had never been able to say to my mother. After breakfast, I asked Aunt Jasmine if I could use her computer. For the next several hours, I wrote a letter to my mother, pouring out 32 years of hurt, confusion, and longing. I detailed specific memories from my childhood moments, when her coldness or criticism had wounded me deeply. The birthday parties she had ruined with her bad mood, the school events she had attended with obvious reluctance, the constant comparisons to other children who were somehow always doing better than me despite my achievements. But alongside each painful memory, I included what had happened next, how I had picked myself up, found support elsewhere, and accomplished something meaningful despite her lack of encouragement. The scholarship I had won, even though she had refused to help me with the application. The teaching award I had received in my second year, despite her dismissal of my career choice. The community I had built for myself in Madison, full of people who valued me exactly as I was. I scoured my phone for photos to include with the letter, images of my classroom decorated for fall, my students gathered around me with bright smiles, snapshots of dinners with friends, hiking trips, moments of simple joy that proved I had built a good life without her approval. I added a picture of myself as a child, earnest and hopeful eyes, searching the camera, searching for love. And finally, a recent photo of myself standing tall and confident before my classroom, a woman who had found her purpose and her strength. When the letter was complete, I printed it out along with the photos and placed everything in a large envelope. I knew I would be gone before my mother read it back to my life in Madison, to the home and career I had built for myself. But I wanted her to understand what she had done, what she had missed, and most importantly, that I had survived and thrived despite it all. "Are you sure about this?" Aunt Jasmine asked, as I prepared to leave the envelope at my mother's house. "I am," I replied. "I need to say these things even if she never truly hears them. I need to say them for me." I drove back to my mother's house, knowing she would be at work. I used my key to enter, quietly placing the envelope in the center of the kitchen table where she could not miss it. Then I left, closing the door on that chapter of my life, though I did not know it at the time. Back at Aunt Jasmine's, we had a conversation that illuminated so much about my mother, about our family history. Over cups of tea that grew cold as we talked, my aunt revealed family secrets that helped me understand, if not excuse, my mother's behavior. "Your grandmother, my mother, was just like Amanda is with you," Aunt Jasmine said quietly. "Cold, critical, never satisfied." She told Amanda once after a dance recital, where she forgot a step, that she was embarrassing the family with her mediocrity. Amanda was 12. I listened stunned as Aunt Jasmine described a childhood of emotional neglect that mirrored my own, a pattern of maternal rejection repeating through generations. "It does not excuse what she said to you, what she has done," my aunt emphasized, reaching across the table to take my hand. "But maybe it helps explain it. She does not know how to be the mother you deserved because she never had that herself." For the first time, I saw my mother not just as the woman who had hurt me, but as a girl who had been hurt herself, who had never healed from her own childhood wounds and had passed that pain on to me. It did not erase the damage she had done, but it helped me contextualize it, helped me see her as a flawed human rather than a monster. That night, my phone began buzzing with calls from my mother. I watched her name flash on the screen again and again, but I did not answer. I was not ready to hear whatever she had to say, whether it was more accusations or belated regret. I needed time to process, to heal, to find solid ground within myself before engaging with her again. Instead, I focused on returning to my life in Madison. I called my principal to explain that I needed to extend my absence by a few more days, citing family issues. I texted friends to let them know I was okay but needed some space. and I began researching therapists in my area, recognizing that I needed professional help to process 32 years of maternal rejection, to break the cycle of seeking validation from someone who could not give it. A week after leaving the letter, I received an email from my mother, the first written communication she had ever initiated with me. The subject line was empty and the body contained just one sentence: "I read your letter, and I have not stopped crying since." It was not an apology, not exactly, but it was an acknowledgement, perhaps the first real one she had ever given me, that my words had reached her, had affected her. It was a small crack in the wall between us, a tiny opening that might, with time and work, allow for something new to grow. For the next 3 months, I focused intensely on my own healing journey. I returned to Madison's and my teaching job, finding comfort in the familiar routine of my classroom and the uncomplicated love my third graders offered so freely. Children have a beautiful honesty about them, a capacity to care without conditions that adults often lose along the way. Being surrounded by their energy and enthusiasm helped ground me during a time when I felt unmoored from everything I had thought I knew about myself and my family. I found a therapist named Dr. Lydia Harrison, a compassionate woman with silver-streaked hair and a gentle but firm approach that helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding my relationship with my mother. In her peaceful office with its soft blue walls and comfortable chairs, I began the hard work of examining the beliefs that had shaped my life, that I needed to be perfect to be loved, that I was somehow responsible for my mother's happiness, that I was fundamentally unworthy of unconditional love. "What your mother said to you," Dr. Harrison told me during one particularly difficult session, "says everything about her wounds and nothing about your worth. The tragedy is not that you were born Nora. The tragedy is that she could not see the gift she was given." We talked about generational trauma, about how patterns of emotional neglect can be passed down through families like toxic heirlooms. We discussed how my mother had likely been recreating the only model of motherhood she knew, perpetuating the same damage that had been done to her. Understanding this did not excuse her behavior, but it helped me depersonalize it somewhat, to see that her treatment of me reflected her limitations, not my value. The most challenging work came when Dr. Harrison asked me to identify the ways I had internalized my mother's voice, how her criticism had become my own inner critic. I realized with shock how often I spoke to myself with the same coldness, the same impossible standards, the same fundamental dissatisfaction that had characterized my mother's attitude toward me. I had absorbed her perspective so completely that I had become my own emotional abuser, continuing her work, even in her absence. "The first step in healing," Dr. Harrison explained, "is to recognize that voice when it speaks, to label it as not your own, and to deliberately choose a different response." It felt strange at first, almost silly, to consciously counter negative thoughts with compassionate ones. When I made a minor mistake in a lesson plan and immediately thought, "You are so careless, always messing things up," I would stop, take a breath, and deliberately think instead, "You are human and humans make mistakes. This is a small error that can be easily fixed." Gradually, with practice, the harsh voice began to weaken, and my own more gentle voice grew stronger. During this period of intensive self-work, I maintained minimal contact with my mother. She called occasionally, and I answered perhaps one time in 3, keeping our conversations brief and superficial. I was not ready for deeper engagement, not while I was still so raw, still learning to protect myself from her habitual criticisms and emotional manipulations. In an unexpected turn of events, I reconnected with James during this time. He had reached out on social media, a casual message asking how I was doing, and somehow that led to phone calls, then video chats, and finally a weekend visit where he drove from Chicago to Madison. Seeing him again, older and more mature, but with the same kind eyes and genuine interest in me, was like finding an anchor in stormy seas. Unlike when we were in college, James was now fully aware of the complexity of my relationship with my mother. One night, as we sat on my couch talking about everything that had happened, he asked the question that I had been avoiding. "Do you think you will ever forgive her?" I considered this carefully, turning the concept of forgiveness over in my mind like a strange object I was seeing for the first time. I do not know if forgiveness is the right word, I said finally. I am working toward understanding, toward acceptance of who she is and who she cannot be. I am trying to let go of the fantasy that she will suddenly transform into the mother I always wanted. Maybe that is a kind of forgiveness. James nodded, his hand warm over mine. And what about moving forward? Do you want her in your life at all? I think I do, I admitted. But on different terms, with boundaries, with the understanding that I cannot expect from her what she is not capable of giving. 3 months after the confrontation in my mother's kitchen, I finally felt ready to see her face to face again. I suggested meeting at a coffee shop in Des Moines, halfway between her home and mine, a neutral territory where neither of us would have the home field advantage. She agreed immediately, her eagerness surprising me. The morning of our meeting, I dressed carefully in clothes that made me feel confident and strong: dark jeans, a soft blue sweater that brought out my eyes, boots with a slight heel that added to my height. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where we would have some privacy, but still be in a public space. And then I waited, my heart pounding as if I were about to give a speech or take an important test. When my mother walked through the door, I almost did not recognize her. She looked smaller somehow, more tentative. Her hair was different, cut into a simple bob without the harsh dye job she had maintained for years. She spotted me and hesitated, as if unsure of her welcome, an uncertainty I had never seen in her before. I stood as she approached, not sure if we should hug or shake hands, or simply nod at each other. She solved the dilemma by stopping a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Nora," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "Thank you for meeting me." I gestured to the chair across from mine. "Would you like some coffee? I was waiting until you arrived to order." We fell into the familiar pattern of discussing trivial matters first: the weather, the traffic on the drive, the quality of the coffee. But underneath these superficial exchanges ran a current of tension, of unspoken words and raw emotions waiting to break through the fragile surface of our civility. Finally, when our coffee cups were half empty and the small talk exhausted, my mother set her cup down with a decisive click against the saucer. Her eyes, so like my own, were red-rimmed and tired. "I read your letter," she said. "Many times. I did not know. Or maybe I did, but I did not let myself know, if that makes any sense." I nodded, waiting for her to continue, determined to give her the space to say whatever she needed to say without interruption. "The pictures you included of you as a little girl," her voice cracked slightly. "You looked so hopeful, so eager to please. And I remember thinking at the time that I needed to toughen you up, that the world would crush that softness if I did not do it first. I thought I was protecting you by being hard on you." She shook her head. "But that was a lie I told myself. The truth is, I was jealous of you, of your opportunities, your freedom, your whole future ahead of you. And I was angry, so angry at your father for leaving, at my mother for never thinking I was good enough, at myself for getting pregnant and giving up dancing. But it was easier to be angry at you." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "My mother said the same words to me once, you know, that I was the biggest mistake of her life. I was 14, and I had just told her I wanted to be a dancer instead of going to college for business like she wanted. She slapped me and said those exact words. I swore I would never be like her, and then—" She gestured helplessly. "Here we are." I felt a complicated mix of emotions listening to her halting confession. Sympathy for the girl she had been, anger on behalf of that same girl, sadness at the cycle of hurt that had continued through me, and a cautious hope that naming it might help break it. "I cannot change the past," my mother continued when I remained silent. "I cannot give you the childhood you deserved or take back the cruel things I said. But I want you to know that you were not a mistake. My choices were my own, and you were an innocent child who deserved better than what I gave you." It was perhaps the closest thing to an apology she was capable of offering, and I recognized the tremendous effort it must have taken her to admit even this much. For a woman who had spent decades building walls of bitterness and blame, this small acknowledgement represented a major breach in her defenses. "Thank you for saying that," I said carefully. "It means a lot to hear it even now." "Is it too late?" she asked, a vulnerability in her voice I had never heard before. For us to have some kind of relationship, I considered her question seriously, weighing my own needs against the possibility of reconciliation. I do not think it is too late, I said finally. But things cannot go back to how they were. I need boundaries, respect for my choices, and honesty between us. I cannot pretend the past did not happen, but I am willing to try building something new if you are. She nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. I would like that. We talked for another hour, beginning the slow, awkward process of getting to know each other as adults, as individuals, rather than just mother and daughter locked in an old pattern of hurt and resentment. We agreed to proceed cautiously with regular phone calls and occasional visits, each of us responsible for maintaining our own emotional health, rather than expecting the other to provide validation or fulfillment. When we parted that day, we did not hug, but my mother reached out tentatively and squeezed my hand, a small gesture that conveyed more genuine affection than I could remember receiving from her in years. Back in Madison, I threw myself into my work with renewed purpose, particularly focusing on children from difficult home situations. I recognized in some of my students the same signs I had shown as a child: the desperate eagerness to please, the crushed look when they fell short of perfection, the hunger for approval and validation. With these children, I was especially gentle, making sure they knew that their worth was not tied to their performance, that they were valued simply for being themselves. In my personal life, I continued building what I thought of as my chosen family. My relationship with James deepened, though we maintained separate homes in our respective cities. I nurtured friendships with people who accepted me as I was, who did not require me to earn their affection through achievement or self-erasure. I started a small support group for adults with emotionally unavailable parents, creating a space where we could share our experiences and healing strategies. My relationship with my mother evolved slowly, with setbacks and difficult moments alongside small victories. There were times when she slipped back into old patterns, when her critical nature emerged despite her best intentions. But there were also new moments of connection, brief glimpses of the mother she might have been if her own wounds had not been so deep, if she had received the help she needed earlier in life. I came to understand that some wounds never fully close, that the scars of childhood rejection remain tender even after years of healing work. But I also discovered that these wounds need not define me, need not limit my capacity for joy, for love, for meaningful connection with others. The greatest gift I gave myself was the freedom from seeking my mother's approval, the recognition that her inability to love me fully was her tragedy, not mine. One day, about a year after our confrontation, I was working with a little girl in my class named Lily. She had made a mistake on her art project and was on the verge of tears, berating herself with words that sounded painfully familiar. "I messed it all up," she said, her small shoulders slumped in defeat. "I am so stupid." I knelt beside her desk, gently turning her face toward mine. "Lily," I said softly, "mistakes are how we learn. They do not make you stupid or bad. They just make you human, like all of us. And you know what? This picture is still beautiful, just in a different way than you planned." As I helped her see the possibility in her mistake, how it could be transformed into something new and unexpected, I realized I was speaking not just to her, but to the child I had been offering the compassion and perspective I had needed so desperately and never received. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, a circle completing itself. I could not change my past, but I could ensure that at least some children would grow up knowing they were valued for who they were, not just for what they achieved. That night I called my mother, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to share my day with her. As we talked, I heard in her voice a genuine interest, an effort to connect that had been absent for most of my life. It was not perfect, and it never would be. But it was real, and it was enough. The journey from that devastating moment in her kitchen to this new, cautious relationship had been long and painful. But what I had done after hearing those terrible words, choosing to respond with truth and boundaries, rather than continuing the cycle of hurt, had changed both our lives in ways I could never have anticipated. By refusing to accept the role of unwanted child, by claiming my right to be treated with dignity and respect, I had not only freed myself, but had offered my mother a chance at her own healing, her own liberation from the patterns that had imprisoned her for so long. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from our deepest wounds if we have the courage to face them honestly and the wisdom to use them as catalysts for growth rather than excuses for bitterness. My mother's cruel words had broken my heart, but in that breaking they had also set me free. Have you ever had to create boundaries with someone you love? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that prioritizing your emotional health is not selfish, it is necessary. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone hurts you is to smile and choose yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it brings healing to anyone who needs it today.